All right, we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2018 Oscar Marathon wrap-up show. I am Christiana Ellis.
I'm Mike McCain.
And if you didn't watch any of other Oscar shows, then I'm surprised that you're watching this one, but welcome. We tried to watch all the Oscar movies, and we watched some of them, but not all, and it's fine, and we're going to talk about it. Sorry, my dog's walking around behind me. So we're going to talk about the winners, and then we're going to do kind of deep dive of the ones that we have each seen since the last time we talked about it.
Yes, well, and I think some of that will be dually covered in that as we go through the winners, we will reach shows that we have seen and not talk about.
Yep. So let's not do what the Oscars do, and just go ahead and just the big ones right up top. So Best Picture, the winner was The Shape of Water.
Yes.
Which is one of two of the Best Picture nominees that we have both each now seen that we hadn't seen before. We had talked previously about Dunkirk and about Get Out and about The Post. But now we've both seen The Shape of Water, and we've both seen Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which are both ones that were potential contenders. You know, like in theory, any of the nominees are contenders, but those were two that had some people guessing that they would win.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you feel about the choice?
Based on what I've seen and what was in this category, I mean, I feel confident this was. I was happy with this. This is what I predicted, and what I would have also chosen. Again, based on the category, and we'll get into this when we get into the next category. But I actually thought that Coco was the best film I saw this year. And like I said, we can talk about that when we talk about it. However, from a purely, when you put all of the storytelling elements together, was it an interesting story? Was it a powerful story? Was it well acted, well put together, well written, good cinematography? And this movie was the best of all of those things. Like how we talked about, like Dunkirk is beautifully made, but the story kind of loses you. The Post has an interesting story, but it doesn't tell it in a very dramatic fashion, and it has some good acting. There's a lot of that there. Three Billboards is different and well acted, but it just doesn't move. It didn't move me.
It kind of ultimately, frustratingly, doesn't take a position on stuff that in some ways I feel a lot of people think it should have.
Yeah, I felt like it was like purposely ambiguous, and they thought that was clever, and it wasn't ultimately rewarding. And Get Out, I liked it a ton, but I also understand it doesn't have the majesty of like a Best Picture.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. So that's kind of where I was at too. Like I would have liked to see Get Out win, but I thought that was pretty unlikely. And honestly, I was a little bit surprised that Shape of Water won, just because it struck me as perhaps being a little too weird to have the mainstream appeal necessary for a Best Picture win. But I guess the world was ready for a woman falls in love with a fish guy movie, apparently.
Yeah, and I know, we're all disparaging about that, and that is what happens, and it is.
I know, it's fun to say. I'm not disparaging.
We all do it, and but if you take it at, I think you kind of convinced me of this, which is why it's funny that you're the one that just said that it was the woman who ran with the fish guy, is that if you think of it as a fairy tale, and let's like even say you reverse roles, and it's a man who falls in love with a mermaid.
Yeah.
That's a fairy tale. And so all they've done is switch the gender roles and made it look like this is what an actual like fish person god thing would be like, you know, instead of what the more fantastical merman version.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not laughing because I disagree. I'm laughing just because I think one of the delights of that movie is that it forces you to say weird things when you're just trying to describe what's in the movie.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, he's like supposed to be this like fairy tale merman, and I mean, he is, but it's what you get when it's not animated and when it's not
right. Well, the whole movie is very much a fairy tale sort of story, right? Like none of the characters are super deep, right? I mean, not to make a water ocean pun, but at the same time, so like I've read some criticism, people feeling like they thought that the secondary characters should have been more interesting or something like that. And I'm like, well, that's really not what it's about, though. That's not the kind of story it's telling.
Right. And I had brought that up because I had heard that in a podcast that I really respect, their pop culture movie views. And they had specifically talked about that as a frustration for them. And I brought that up, and you defended it and said, well, just go see it and see if you really feel that way. And you're right. Like after you see it, it's just kind of storybook characters. Like they're not that deep. I mean, the Prince and Snow White isn't that deep. The dwarves aren't that deep. They just have funny names and a personality that they use to it. You know, like Stephen Snow White's not really that deep. Like,
right. Like the most complicated as it gets is really just kind of the sort of the dual nature of like, well, who is the monster in this story? Well, it's obviously Michael Shannon's character is the monster, right? Because the fish, but that's the sort of duality they're playing with. But that's just this. It's the same as Beauty and the Beast in terms of that kind of a reversal. It's still very much firm fairy tale territory to have it turn out that the quote monster is actually nice, and it's really the guy who's
hunting
the monster. He's the real bad guy. Like that's standard fairy tale stuff.
Right. It's exactly Beauty and the Beast. And the reason that we, always gave Beauty and the Beast the pass, I guess, on that is because he started off as a real guy and then was transformed. And so he was cursed. Whereas this guy's just always been this fish guy thing.
Yeah. Well, and that actually just reminds me, like I read an article that was pretty critical of The Shape of Water, and it had a couple of points that I think are worth mentioning. One that ultimately it's hard to disagree with someone's subjective viewing of something, but I definitely felt differently. But another one that I think is actually perhaps a fair criticism. So the first being this idea that her disability, her inability to speak, this idea that somehow she has to, she only can find love with a monster because, so that idea that somehow she can't have a regular relationship because she's weird. She only gets to have a weird relationship. And I don't feel like that's the movie's message. I don't think that's what the movie is saying about that. But you can understand, I guess, I can see how if you come to the movie with a certain set of expectations about it, it might not exactly meet those. And so when someone came away from the movie feeling like that's what they just saw, it's hard to argue that exactly, but certainly was not my impression of what the movie was trying to say at all. In fact, I think it was like exactly the opposite, is in the sense that the whole movie's story theme is the idea that he's not a monster. He's beautiful and she's beautiful. And it's really only the ugliness inside that makes someone a monster.
Right. That's exactly what I was going to say, is that it's, yes, you could paint it as a weird relationship, but the way that I saw it was that it was a beautiful relationship, and she being mute was a mechanism to set that up, because she didn't get frustrated with him because she couldn't just talk to him, because she can't talk to anybody. So she was the one who took the time to learn to communicate on that deeper plane. And that's what made them, you know, fall in love with each other, is that they were communicating without words.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, she had to be mute for that to happen.
Right.
Because he has no words.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see it as like, oh, well, she's weird and he's weird, and that's the only way she can.
Yeah.
I didn't see that at all. I saw it as, yeah, if you take all that pretense away of just the talking, do you really connect? And if you really connect, what does it matter what you look like on the outside?
Mm-hmm.
What you can say to each other,
Right. So like that was the one of the criticisms that's like, it's subjective, but I didn't feel that way. Like very strongly, I felt like that was not the message that the movie was trying to convey. It's one thing to take that away from it, but it's different than saying that was the authorial intent, right?
Yeah.
But the other one that I think is perhaps a more valid criticism, which to my mind does not ruin or even really diminish the movie so much as make it an example of something that's like how we can maybe continue to improve on these things, is that, as we've had so much more focus on representation in movies lately, this is an example of a character with a disability being played by an actress who does not have a disability.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically, it's just, the whole point is that there are actors with various disabilities. And if you are writing a movie about a disabled character and still don't cast a disabled actor or actress, like what roles are they supposed to get? Now, again, Guillermo del Toro wrote this movie for this actress. So I don't think there was ever any question of casting anybody else. But also, on top of that element of it, which is, does not ruin the movie, but it's something worth discussing, I think. But the other element on top of that is this wish fulfillment sequence where she sings. Now, on one level, we can say that like this is the beauty of expressing in a way that, she usually can't. And so like, if we could only hear, this is like in Hunchback of Notre Dame, the musical, where, he normally speaks with the voice, but then when he sings, it's like his true heart's expression, and it's different. Right. And it's kind of like that, but you can also say how, if you're viewing this from the lens of a disabled audience member, it feels like, well, yeah, but you can't actually do that. It's like highlighting the thing that the character can't do and making it seem like it is important, because they would have this wish fulfillment. Their heart's dream would be to express themselves in this way that they can't really. And it's not empowering for the disabled person. I could see that argument.
Yeah, I can see that argument. I guess I had thought of that as more of a dream sequence as opposed to, but I guess it is meant to be like that she is enabled because he has like that godlike power or whatever. But I had seen it as a dream sequence, and which if you see it as a dream sequence, then it does not take away that enablement, because it didn't actually happen, Right. But I'm not positive that that's what.
Well, it's not the fact that it being a dream sequence doesn't change the idea that the movie chose that expression of the idea. You know what I mean? Like, her fantasy involved her essentially not having her disability.
Yeah, okay.
So, and again, I'm not saying this makes it a bad movie. I'm saying like it's worth discussing these things. And I think that that was like,
But would we feel the same way if a paraplegic character had a fantasy of being able to run and play sports? I mean,
well, it's a matter of context, though. Like, what is the story trying to tell us by that? Right? Like, is it supposed to be like? I think in an example of like that, where someone who's paralyzed or needs a wheelchair, or maybe even more dramatic, like quadriplegic or something like that, and they had a dream sequence where they got to get up and dance, I think it would read to most people as it's supposed to be kind of tragically sad, because we know they can't really do that. Right?
Right.
So, but it doesn't quite play that way in the movie for this one, right? Because it's inability to speak and then being able to sing.
Right. And I guess now that we've sort of talked it through, what I feel like the movie was trying to show was that it felt like to her, because of their connection, that she was able to sing.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't matter if she could physically sing or not sing. The desire that she had to do that
mm-hmm.
was empowered by her, like, just love for him. Like, she was able
mm-hmm.
to just be like whatever it is that she wanted from singing.
Yeah. And I mean, I
feel that way.
I liked the sequence, and I think it works that way in the story. It's more just a matter of realizing that the same scene can be viewed from more than one context, right?
I agree. That's why I think it was nice to talk through this, because I hadn't really thought about it, because I always saw it as, again, a dream sequence first of all, but now that we've sort of gone into it,
mm-hmm.
the idea is that what it's trying to say is that he makes her feel like she is complete.
Right. And so that I think maybe what makes it harder when we're having this specific discussion is, like, if we imagine that someone is already irritated because they have chosen a non-disabled actress to play this disabled character, and then there's specifically a dream sequence in the movie that's like, this is why you couldn't cast a disabled actress, because you would have to give a special effects or something so that, like, someone who really can't speak wouldn't be able to do that, even to make the movie.
It's fair.
And so I could see it just having an extra little layer of sting for that reason.
Right. I guess, yeah, if you're looking at from the point of view, which isn't, it's not necessarily wrong, that doing this is essentially like putting on blackface, then, like, we wouldn't put up with that.
Right.
I mean,
mm-hmm.
if they chose to, cast the Black Panther movie with a bunch of white people and then, like, use special effects to,
right.
Like, I guess if you take it to that, yeah, it makes sense, and I do see their point of view.
Mm-hmm. Now, like, again, we don't have to, this does not mean, oh, this is actually a terrible movie, everybody should pick at it. Like, it's more an example of, as we are trying to be more sensitive and aware of things like representation from a racial perspective, we can try to be more aware of these things from all sorts of perspectives.
Yeah, it's a good conversation to have, and it's
mm-hmm.
I think that's a totally fair.
Right. So while those are examples of criticism that I had heard about it that I thought was worth discussing, but boy, the things that I love about the movie, I mean, I just loved it from the very first frame, just like that sumptuous set of the apartment, but with all the weird dreamlike underwater floating and the score coming in. It's just like, I was in love with the movie from like the first 3 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like a fairy tale.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it was just it was. I really just, I loved it. I was enchanted all the way along. Michael Shannon plays a great bad guy. I mean, he's arguably a little bit typecast in this type of role now, but because he's so good at it. He's just he's glowering. But then kind of some of the, like, the unexpected stuff, like with the scientist who ends up deciding to help and his whole deal, the complexity of, he's a double agent, but he's increasingly realizing that both sides disrespect the beauty of this creature,
which is why he falls to help the
right.
the cleaning ladies, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And like, so his whole storyline I thought was great. And
which actually, I never thought that, like, the fact that they're cleaning ladies, like, gives us little Cinderella vibe to it. Little tip of the cap, you know?
Right. And then I honestly would have loved to see Richard Jenkins win for Best Supporting Actor, because I loved him in this movie so much.
I did, but didn't he lose to Sam
Rockwell from Three Billboards? Yeah,
he was really good too in that. I mean,
he was. I guess I don't want to take that away from him, but I guess I just, in terms of a sentimental preference, I would have liked to see Richard Jenkins win.
That's fair.
I liked his character a lot more than I liked Sam Rockwell's character.
I mean, yeah. Person by design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, like that character's whole subplot too, of this idea that he resists wanting to help at first, and in fact he even resists kind of really committing himself to this weird friendship that he's got with his neighbor, because he's got in his head all of these plans about how he's going to live this like normal, successful life. And it's it basically gets to a point where he realizes how empty that stuff was, that he had really built it up into something that really never was. And in the meantime was ignoring this real connection he already had, and this opportunity to actually do something great and important.
Because the reality of who he saw himself as, or who he was, who he was, not who he saw himself as, like who he actually was a guy who could paint, who was an older man, who was gay. And and those things were not allowing him to be successful. You know, when he went to the advertising agency and tried to do the freelance project, like, they didn't want a painting. And so he isn't successful in that. When, you know, a guy is putting on a charm thing to, like, get him to buy ice cream, and he then makes a pass at him, and the guy's like, no, dude, gay guys aren't allowed here. You need to get out of here. Like,
this is a family place.
Yeah, this is a family place. Like, the destruction of, like, how that guy played up to him to get him to buy more ice cream, and then, you know, so who he is didn't fit with what his idea of, like, trying to be a normal, successful guy, and it breaks him down. And like you said, he has this real connection with his neighbor, and he actually can make a difference and help people, being who he is and using his, you know, his art to make the fake ideas. And, like, you know, like, you know, there's, I loved his character too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. And just the look of it. I mean, the fact that, like, I knew that even if it didn't win best picture, I really did want it to win some of the things like production design, for example, just because the visual, I mean, it's Guillermo del Toro. All of his movies are beautiful and intricate and to look at and everything, but boy, this one is just, it's really good. And so I really liked it. So I'm glad it won.
Yeah. And the score, I mean, I was really happy with that.
Oh, just to dovetail into what we were talking about earlier, Michael Shannon's character, his theme on the score is, the track is called "The Monster." Isn't that great?
That's pretty good.
Yeah. But yep. So I don't think I have anything else specifically about Shape of Water. I mean, I could keep on talking about it, but we also have lots of other movies.
We also have lots more to get through.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump to Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. We talked about it at least a little bit in general. I think it is exceptionally well made, but a lot of the criticism that I heard about it was that it tried to redeem characters who didn't deserve redemption. And while I would disagree with that, at least in the sense that I don't think the movie actually tries to claim that they are redeemed, as much as it's just saying, hey, people are complicated. But at the same time, hey, people are complicated, and maybe that racist cop has some good in him, isn't exactly a very woke 2018 movie.
No, and so here's a funny thing about this is that, you know, it's trying to be layered and have some ambiguity behind everybody's motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And so this movie, granted, didn't come out technically in 2018, but it came out close enough around the time of Black Panther, which is a superhero movie, but one that has incredibly layered motivations and character. That really, like you said, to be woke to 2018, to this whole idea of, you know, do you hold to traditions or do you risk things to help other people? And does childhood and what happened, you know, and you know, does, if this guy killed a guy who was bad but only sort of, but also related to you, does it make him now bad as a leader? You know, like just the level of what that movie brought outside of just being a Black superhero movie. And then you see something like this and it feels like it's trying too hard to be ambiguous.
Yeah, like,
you know, everybody delivered what they were supposed to do, but it didn't feel like genuine.
Right.
You know?
It's a very well told story. The question only comes in, like, why did this story need to be told? Not in the same way as the Dunkirk. It's more just like staking your claim in the idea that, gosh, people are complicated. What are you going to do? Not a very brave storytelling decision.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like, yeah, we know. So what?
Right. And I think that's kind of my point with like using Black Panther. It's like that did it better. And also had.
I'm glad you saw that, by the way. We hadn't actually talked about that since.
Oh, yeah, but also had really cool like CGI battles and superhero stuff, but still told that part of the story better than this.
Yeah.
You know, and
well, see, like that's a perfect example of a movie designed to be just a blockbuster and not Oscar bait, but it actually has a position and it takes a stand and it recognizes complexity, but still makes a point of saying, where you have the antagonist and the protagonist actually essentially agree on some of the big evils of the world, and their disagreement is really just on what do you do about it.
Yeah, I mean is incredibly complex when you go and the bad guy is the one saying, "Hey, we have resources to help repress people, and we should use them." And it's like, wait, that's the bad guy's position.
Right. You know? Yeah. So while, yeah, like Three Billboards has excellent acting, you know, the scene by scene, like the dialogue is good. It's complex. It's layered. There's a lot to like in it. I mean, it's not exactly, it's certainly not a comedy, but it is still frequently very funny. And also it's very tense and it's emotional. But again, I think just when it comes down to it, it's like it's not trying to telling just a character study of these messed up people who get into trouble in this town and gosh, everything's complicated, isn't it? Is just kind of, I feel like I want more from movies than that.
Yes. And so, I mean, I think that's why, like, on some of the acting awards, like, I'm okay with the winning because for what they were tasked to do, it is phenomenally put together.
Yeah.
But it ultimately, and that's why I said, I know it's a weird comparison, but I saw them very close to each other. And I was in this mindset of like movies with layered complexity. And I'm like, well, the movie where that was sort of the secondary part of it did it better than the movie where that was the whole point. That's that's where I'm at.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. I think we're on the same page there, that it's like skillfully made, but kind of oddly safe in a lot of respects. Yeah. And so I think that's where, even though I would disagree with some of the articles I read about it, where they're trying to say that it like redeems these bad people who don't deserve it. And I'm like, I don't think it redeems them, but at the same time, it sure doesn't work very hard to say that they're not redeemed. You know, like it doesn't really take any kind of a stand. I mean, like if you're going to try to pull any kind of a message from this movie, it's like, well, don't be too hard on that guy who tortured a black prisoner because he might turn out to actually be a good detective.
But
so, like, what?
I'm just on this kick. Like, let's draw that same redemption theme into Black Panther, and we'll go with Black Panther spoilers, which I have an image for that if you need it.
Okay.
It also doesn't let it sort of redeems Michael B. Jordan's character at the end, but not 100%.
Well, yeah, it's that respect and recognition. It's like, I wish we could have been on the same side, but we just can't. Our tactics are too different, and they can't mesh. But this sadness that's like, we both recognize that there's this big problem in the world, and I wish that we could have come together on a way to do something about it instead of having to fight over what to do about it.
Right. I wish, and that's the thing, is like, he's even sort of offered the redemption of, hey, we could probably still heal you.
Mm-hmm.
And his character takes the stance of, I don't want to be healed. I don't want to go. I mean,
I still think I'm right.
I still think I'm right. And so I don't want to be jailed by you and have to give to your point of view. So I would rather die now that, thank you for showing me the sunset that I needed to see, but I'm ready to go now.
Yeah, it's a really interesting reflection on the whole idea of trial by combat and that sort of whole thing, because, Wakanda being the sort of place that it is, the idea that this actual physical fight is how they decide who gets to be king feels a little bit regressive. It's like, that's still how you do it? That seems strange. But it's also nuanced because, for the one part, like the king of Wakanda also actually is supposed to be the Black Panther who literally goes out and fights people. So it makes a little bit more sense than a regular king. But this reflection on that at the end.
He can't use his advantages in the fight. Like, so he has to be good enough in like normal hand-to-hand combat that when he's given the advantages, he becomes the greatest.
Right. Yeah. And then, so at the end, though, to have it be about this thing of even the person who lost is kind of saying, well, I agree that I lost, but I don't think that means that my position lost. You beat me in a fight. It doesn't mean that your argument is better. And T'Challa recognizing that, saying the fact that I was able to beat you does not prove me right.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, Black Panther is great. I wasn't necessarily expecting us to get into that, but yeah, it's very good.
Well, it felt right to me, not just it didn't just come to me in the context of this conversation. Like, I felt like that after I saw these movies, because Three Billboards like makes this point about being ambiguous about people and their motivations and their good and their evil. And that's sort of what is intriguing about it. And then, like I said, then I literally walk into this blockbuster CGI, have your popcorn, like, let's make $1 billion. And it does that message better.
Yeah.
Across all of those facets. And it
takes it beyond. It goes the extra step to it doesn't stop at people are complicated. What are you going to do? It says people are complicated, and you can recognize that and still work hard to try to make the best choice you can and move forward accordingly, instead of saying,
and recognize that you can make changes.
I shrugged there, anyone who's listening to audio only, instead of saying shrug. Yeah, the little emoticon thing, right? Yeah. But yeah, so
aside, but I think it does, while potentially discussing a movie that might be up for some of these Oscars next year.
Yeah.
I felt like that kind of deconstructed Three Billboards argument.
Now, yeah, I wouldn't have thought to make that connection, but I think it's a good one.
Thanks.
All right. So do you have anything else to talk about? I mean, we might talk some of the details of some of these movies as we get to the individual category winners, but I don't necessarily have anything else general to say about it.
That we devote some time to the next one.
Coco.
Yes, which, as I said before, I felt like this was my favorite movie that I saw this year.
Yeah, it's like I don't like feel as necessarily definitive, but I loved it deeply. I really did. It was very good. One brief question before we get into the meat of it, though. Did you have the Frozen short ahead of it when you saw it?
No, because I saw it on. I rented it.
See, when I saw it in the theater, this became just a little bit of a thing, but it had, lots of these movies have shorts in front of them, right? Well, this one had a Frozen short that was 17 minutes long. And it kind of kept going and going and going. And I liked it okay, but there's definitely a little bit of like, you're looking at your watch at about 10 minutes in going, wait, are we getting to Coco? This is not what I bought my ticket for.
No, I got straight into Coco because I got it off of Amazon Prime. And
there you go. I need to rewatch it because I saw it in the theater and loved it, but I have not rewatched it since. But yes, so it's your favorite movie from last year. Tell us about what you like about it so much.
So it tells a story from a different perspective than we've ever seen. It takes something that's known to us, like the Day of the Dead celebration, and immerses us in this and in this like deeply Mexican like historical like idea. And it starts off very simply as, here's a story about a family that has some issues and someone's passing on, and we're gonna like be a part of this celebration. And sort of it evolves into this journey that it feels like one of those journeys like back from like old Greek stories where you go into the underworld and all this. And so, but it has such a fantastical like look to it. And then what we believe is our hero's journey gets so deeply deconstructed that it blows up his entire like view of his childhood, his family, his life. Like he is just like blown open and has to go find his new journey. And it turns out it was there in this other way that he hadn't seen. Like, it's just a really fun, epic.
Yeah.
Quest. Like it's a quest really. And it looks beautiful and it's fun and it has a cool theme of being like the Day of the Dead underworld where all these characters are like look like Day of the Dead characters. And it's just everything about it just feels really good. And it was so unexpected. Like it definitely, and and you and I have joked about this for a long time, is that that is a thing with me sometimes, was like I can pick up on sort of where the movie's going from where the turn's going to be. This one, I did not see that coming. And so that always feels really good to me.
Right. Yeah. Like, I don't know that we necessarily need to be coy about spoilers, but I'm also not going to just jump right into the spoiler so much as to say, I agree with you. I think I know just the sort of turn reveal that you're talking about. And it definitely took it a different way.
Right. Well, yeah, the boy's hero musician that he's going to like get advice from or going to see turns out to not actually be his father, like turns out to not be the guy. And it's actually his partner who he killed, which has been his goofy skeletal guy this whole time. And you don't see that coming, and it feels so good when it all kind of comes together.
Yeah, when everything clicks and you kind of
right. And that's why the title is really cool, because Coco isn't one of our main characters.
No.
Coco is the grandmother of our hero. And she's
extremely aging grandmother. I think technically a great grandmother, actually, right?
Oh, great, technically great grandmother, yes. And but she's the last connection to this, you know, guitar hero that, you know, Coco aspires to be, but he's not allowed to be because everyone said you're not allowed to play guitar because of whatever happened with your father or your great grandfather.
Yeah.
And Coco is the connection to that, and she's the one that then reveals all of that when he's been chasing this guy who was the famous guitarist. And it turns out, like you said, that the famous guitarist, stole the song from his actual, you know, great
right, yeah. And so it definitely all pieces together in a very clever way that I think is just it's easy for reveals like that to feel kind of cheap, but this one really doesn't. And honestly, also just kind of the whole theme of, I mean, this part of what this reminds me of, this point I'm going to make is I recently watched a YouTube video. There's a guy named Mikey Newman who makes great YouTube videos about movies. And I was rewatching one about The Emperor's New Groove, Disney animated movie, which it's very funny. But one of the things mentioned about it, it's one of these things is, again, like when we're watching movies through the lens of today, we can recognize they really made no attempt whatsoever to have anything authentic about like any of the, you know, Incan people or culture or anything, or have anyone with any Incan ancestry involved in any way whatsoever. So it's like there's no attempt whatsoever, which I'm not bringing up necessarily to criticize an old movie that was made, you know, decades ago, so much as to say this one leans hard into trying to have, you know, be about like this actual cultural thing. It's still telling a fantastical story, but trying to have it be meaningful about the real sort of cultural, I don't want to say mythology, spirituality about the subject matter, and having that be meaningful to the story and not just set dressing.
Yeah, and with just this clever overtone of humor, where like it doesn't feel like disparaging humor. Like all of the humor that's dealt with, like with the crossing of the bridge and like what these, you know, nightclubs that exist in these places, and you know, all of the set design that, like, there's jokes with all of it that don't feel like they're undercutting the spirituality. Right. And that's a really hard balance. And that's why, like, I just watched this thing and I was just immersed by what this movie looked like, the story this movie told, and how it just got to me in my heart of, wow, that was not, I thought it was going one way and I was all in for that. And it just turned a 90-degree corner, and it made it that much better. It was so much more impactful when that happened.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the whole thing,
all the feels, as they say.
Yeah, the whole thing starts with such a superficially simple idea of his family insists that he can't ever play or even listen to music. That's just so unreasonable. We're 100% on this kid's side. That's a stupid thing for his family to request, and he shouldn't listen to them.
Right.
That's how we're made to feel at the beginning, right? But then
the progression becomes, oh, well, it's because his great-great-grandfather decided to go be a famous musician and left his family in the dust. And that seems kind of trite to still be that mad about, you know?
Right. or at the very least, that feels like an ordinary sort of plot that we might expect in a movie like this.
Oh, okay. Well, now we know why they are mad.
Right. And the quest is going to be to seek out this guy who left his family behind, show him what he left behind, and we're going to bring everybody back together to be happy, is what the ordinary, like, expected plot from that setup is. Right. But to have it turn out like that, there's this whole extra dimension of stealing songs and having your whole career be based on something that's like based on sincerity that is ultimately fake. And then the idea of recognizing, getting to the point where you understand how important your family is and the reason why you might be willing to make even such a seemingly unreasonable sacrifice, because family is that important. But also from there, going to the point where this unreasonable request is coming from a place of pain. How can we heal that? Instead of just saying, that's unreasonable, I'm not going to listen to you. But this recognition that maybe it's going to take some work, but maybe by trying to foster intergenerational understanding and discussion of this painful subject matter, we can get to a point where you're able to release that pain and remember the good.
Right.
And it was, I cried at, a couple points actually, and towards the end there.
Oh, me too. I mean, I definitely cried at this movie. I was surprised by this movie. Mm-hmm. I thought this movie was visually fantastic. And that's why, I am passionate that this was my favorite movie of the year. And probably part of that, again, comes with expectations. I had a certain expectation going into The Shape of Water, and it basically delivered on that. Like, it looked like what I was supposed to.
If you've seen a Guillermo del Toro movie before and you know the basic premise, he makes exactly that movie.
Right. And you and I had talked about it a little bit without getting into details. You would sort of give me the concept behind why it's interesting outside of being like a lady falling in love with a fish person with some secondary characters who don't have a lot of personality. Mm-hmm. You had defended that, so I kind of knew where to go with that. But this movie, I mean, yes, it's a Pixar movie. I get that it's supposed to be good. I just didn't. I knew it was supposed to be good. I did not expect to be moved the way I was moved when I watched this movie. And I was just absolutely blown away from the beauty of the movie, the beauty of the storytelling, the beauty of the plot line, the twist, like I said, the giving the jokes to the Day of the Dead celebration, but still honoring it. Like that, it was so much complexity to that really felt good. And then there was, my wife and I had a funny aside that, the grandfather, like the actual grandfather, not the great grandfather, he looks like a cartoon embodiment of my dad. You'll probably have to go back and look at it, but he does. And so we kept laughing about that. When you get to the really emotional parts, and then like the abuelo would come in, and it's kind of like, and my dad's Cuban. If for anybody who's listening and didn't know, but so he's not Mexican, but there's still like there are some of those personality traits. Like if you're going to do a cartoon that it physically looked like him, it acted like him, talked like him. Like if you had to make a cartoon of my dad, like he was that. And so again, we'd be crying and having these emotional times, and then the abuelo would come in, and we'd both be like, "This is my dad." So the whole experience of this movie was just it was so much fun, and I think now that I just said that, I don't know that I attributed it to it in my first like thought of the movie, but the fact that like my wife and I watched this together, and she also was as moved, and that doesn't always happen, with anybody. You don't always watch movies together and feel the same like direction with it. And this was one that we both really was like so powerful for both of us, even having two very different childhoods, and just seeing this kind of come together. And that's why I left this saying, this is my favorite movie of the year.
Wow. It's great when
that's my case.
Yeah. Well, hey, no, I agree with you that like all that stuff is amazing. Like, there's a little bit more distance for me. Like I saw it, months ago. So there's just that a little bit more of a gap in terms of the bubbling over of the passion, but I absolutely loved it. I mean, although certainly it was not ever part of my own sort of upbringing, the idea of, the Day of the Dead celebration and everything. I mean, I remember there's a LucasArts adventure game called Grim Fandango that is all based on kind of the aesthetic and concepts of the Day of the Dead. And so like all the characters are skeletons and that sort of thing. And it's a great game and I loved it. But it also is more focused on the aesthetics and borrowing them and telling, a noir mystery sort of story, as opposed to really leaning into the actual spirituality of it. But for this one to end on such a note of really driving home the importance on an emotional level of remembering the people who meant something to us and holding on to that memory, even when it's painful, as being important. And that's something really beautiful. And so, this is a kid's movie about death. And it's amazing.
But that's also one of the greatest things of, whether, again, only there's not a ton of cultures that celebrate Day of the Dead, but that is the sort of the amazing thing about that, is that's what it's meant to be, is a positive reflection of remembering the dead, as opposed to, it's like a wake, but you have it every year. And that's what I thought, why I thought it was beautiful that the movie delivered like a ton of humor along with that. Because it's not supposed to be dark. Like, yes, they're dead, but they've done their life, they've moved on, and we're all still connected. That's what it's trying to tell us. So there's, like you said, that spiritual piece is woven into the fabric of the film.
Yeah.
But the lightheartedness of like, hey, this is a thing that we do and acknowledge and participate in, and it doesn't have to be this super solemn negative thing to connect with our older relatives who have passed on. Like, I just, we
didn't even really talk about the music, but the music's great too.
The music is great. I didn't not like the music. That is my one Oscar, though, that I had a serious disagreement with, because I had seen two of the music nominees, and and the song, it is important in this movie. It's a good song. All of the music is great. I felt like some of the songs in The Greatest Showman were stronger and more impactful on the movie than this. But I'm not upset that this won, but I felt strongly that those were better.
Well, I didn't see The Greatest Showman, so I can't make that direct comparison. I mean, I liked the song as presented in the Oscars. I think what I would say about the presentation of Remember Me in the Oscar ceremony, and in particular the nomination of it as Best Original Song, I mean, it seems like the focus is on like the end credits version of the song, which, I cared way less about than the actual specific story context of the song. Like the couple of times that it came up and its repeated meaning as it, is presented in different places, I thought was amazing. And then the end credits version where they make it more poppy and it's a different singer, and it's like, I don't care about that nearly so much. Like I feel like what it reveals to me is that it's not so much the song as much as the movie's characters singing the song in very specific circumstances that I liked, as opposed to it being a standalone song that's better. If that makes any sense.
Well, it makes sense.
Yeah. Because I loved the song in the movie, and then the end credits version, I was like, I like the in-movie version better. It's kind of like how in Frozen, there's the actual, musical song part where Elsa sings Let It Go. And in the end credits, they have a pop singer. I don't remember who they had do it, but sing like a bubblegum version of the song. And I'm like, well, but no, I wanted the one where the actual character sings it. Like, that's the one I'm interested in. This just feels like someone else singing that song, and that's less weighty that way. And so I guess it felt a little bit like that too. But I love the music in general. And honestly, I like the song that I found myself re-listening to on the soundtrack is actually Un Poco Loco, the one that the kid sings in this little music festival thing, that his audition to try to get to go see his idol.
Yeah. Or his idol. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. But just him being so nervous at first, but then doing, just it's a fun little song, Anyway, though, Coco,
yeah, I mean,
amazing movie. Everybody should watch it.
Like, if you like mariachi music, like, all of the music has that feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much fun. It's such a, I mean, even if for some reason you go into this movie and the depth of it doesn't speak to you the way that it does to me, I think you can probably say this. It's still a fun movie.
Oh,
and, and worth watching. Like, it's a good time.
Yeah. Like, for example, one of the reasons, like, a lot of the Best Picture nominees that we talked about are movies that I would not recommend to just anyone unreservedly. Right. Like, for example, my stepmom's parents are very nice people, extremely, I'm going to say conservative. I don't quite mean politically, but their taste in movies is they like middle of the road, expected stories where nothing too racy or violent happens. That's the kind of movies they want to watch. And I would not recommend Shape of Water to them.
Or Get Out.
Or Three Billboards. Or half of the Best Picture nominees this year. Well, really, I'm trying to think of one of them that I would recommend to them, and I can't get there. Maybe The Post.
Pretty safe.
Yeah. But Coco, anyone could watch Coco. It's great. It's all audiences. There is no one for whom I would not recommend Coco.
Yes. And what I like, I think last thing I'll say that I like about it is I feel like there was an elevated, we see a lot of really good animated movies that have the solid kids theme,
mm-hmm.
and then sort of the elevated, like, adult subplot that you can kind of get and enjoy if you're taking your kids. With Coco, I felt like those mirror each other.
Yeah.
I feel like it lets kids experience something at a little bit of a deeper level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's definitely it's really the same theme, but with just different, like, echoes on different levels that you can pick up on. But it's really not like, for example, I think we both really liked Zootopia, but that's one where there's a whole lot of that movie that little kids are just not going to process. Like, they might get some of the stuff about not judging people by what they look like, right? But that would be probably as far as a lot of, younger viewers would get.
Exactly. That's the depth of it. Yeah.
Right. Whereas, they wouldn't really pick up on, like, larger societal sort of satire or commentary or whatever. Whereas with Coco, I mean, the story is kind of the story, and it's really sort of basic, but it's so fundamental to human existence that it kind of never stops being relevant. Because it's such a, this, the idea of losing our loved ones and how we try to remember them and that sort of thing is just such a painful and beautiful thing that it's never, that never goes away. That is a constant thing that people need to deal with throughout their whole lives.
Yeah. And they're not going to catch, like, the plot twist of how it's setting it up to be one thing and then turns it to another. But they're going to get this whole idea of, I mean, they're not insulated from the fact that they're in the land of the dead. Like, they're in the underworld, or the whatever it is there. I mean, it's the land of the dead, and it doesn't shy away from that. And it very much owns that this is what this culture deals with. And if you were a kid who had no exposure to that, you're going to ask some questions. which you might not after watching Zootopia.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I could go on forever. This was my favorite movie of the year. I retain that. And by that,
yeah. All right. So yes, we are agreed. Everybody, go watch Coco.
Yes.
After we finish watching us talk about the rest of these movies.
Yeah. Or not.
So Coco won Best Animated Feature.
It's better than anything else we're going to talk about.
So go watch Coco, and then you can come back and watch the rest. Yeah. So it won Best Animated Feature. The only other one that we saw was The Boss Baby, and I think we'd definitely agree that Coco beats The Boss Baby. But the others, I can't help but think that, like, I would, they're probably good, but Coco is. It's hard to argue with Coco.
The Vincent thing looked interesting. I mean,
they're fine. I'm sure. It's not a shot against them, but Coco is amazing.
Yeah. So Coco just far and above. Yeah.
Yeah. Best director. I don't know if we are going to have anything new to say, but Guillermo del Toro won for The Shape of Water, and it's an excellently directed movie. He is one of the brightest cinematic voices. Brightest voices doesn't really track, but he makes good movies, and I like them. Yeah,
I mean, I think the only thing I noted is that my pick versus my prediction. I'm doing quote signs in the air. My pick would have been Jordan Peele, but Jordan Peele, he got to win the screenwriter, the screenplay. Right.
Yeah.
He was still my pick. My prediction was that Guillermo del Toro would win this, even if it didn't win Best Picture. I thought that he would still because, 3 Billboards and Call Me by Your, some of these other things were kind of creeping in to that Best Picture conversation, and they're not in this one. So my prediction was that he would definitely win this, but anyway, I hope Jordan Peele had won, but I am not unhappy with this win either.
Yeah.
I love Guillermo del Toro. I'm happy to see his work continue to be rewarded.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So moving on to Best Actor. There's not any new movies that we haven't talked about yet there, but Gary Oldman won for Darkest Hour. I did see that movie, and he's good in it, but I don't know. I'm not sure. I feel like it was the best even of the 3 that I saw. So, I mean, it was fine, but it's kind of like he does a really good Winston Churchill impression.
Yeah. I mean, I actually listened to a podcast that made the joke that the whole movie was designed to be Gary Oldman saying, "Look, I'm Winston Churchill." And that's like
I could say the things that Winston Churchill said.
Right. Like, that's the whole plot of the movie is I'm going to behave like Winston Churchill. I'm going to look like him. I'm going to be fat. I'm going to be old. And I'm going to be like Winston Churchill. But that's pretty much all that happens in this movie. And that's all that's going to be here.
The Dan Harmon, who's the creator of like Community and Rick and Morty and stuff like that, has a podcast called Harmontown. And he was talking about Darkest Hour on it. And what he was saying is like, well, one of the things that's kind of remarkable watching this movie and thinking about Winston Churchill is just how many really famous one-liner sorts of quotes that are attributed to Winston Churchill. But on the other hand, that's kind of like why we know him, is because like he ran his mouth so effectively that it changed the world. That's kind of what he did. So the fact that he said a lot of important things is maybe not so surprising in that context. Is that like that's actually the reason we know who he is because he's so good at talking. He really didn't do that much else. But anyway. Anyway, though, yeah, Darkest Hour. I mean, he's good in it. It's a good movie. I liked it better than Dunkirk, just in terms of its sort of connection to the same time period and some overlapping events. I feel like it was a more interesting telling of that piece of history.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, so let's go ahead and move on now. So Best Actress went to Frances McDormand for Three Billboards. She was very good. I saw all 4 of the 5 nominees. I didn't see I, Tonya. But I don't know. I don't think I necessarily disagree with this this win. She's really good in a complicated role, because as previously discussed, that's what that movie does really well, is like, look, it's a complicated character. See how complicated she is?
And, you know, honestly, you have to imagine there's a little bit of like just Frances McDormand's like personality. And with the time frame of what we're in, and knowing that she's willing to speak up and like stand for the rights that, you know, maybe Saoirse Ronan's not going to do, you know, and Meryl Streep's maybe going to say it in a way that's a little more diplomatic or archaic. Like, it's just going to feel older, you know. And Sally Hawkins is just going to be so happy because she did. I mean, she did a great job, but
yeah. I mean, yeah, it's great for her to get the nomination, but she's not kind of the known force, right, the way some of the other names there are. And like, obviously, you know, Saoirse Ronan is also a, you know, newcomer in that sense.
Right. And this just felt like, I mean, it just felt like in the time that we're in right now, with, you know, everybody looking to, you know, kind of like noticeably like recognize this equality. Like, Frances McDormand has, like, obviously Best Actress always existed, but now you have somebody who's going to have a voice, and she delivered on that, because she talked about something that nobody else would have talked about, with this whole the fact that this inclusion rider exists. Yeah, that, you know, you can, if you're a big star, you can sign on to a movie and say, I want equal representation, like, across, like, I want you guys to make an effort to do these things. And that was something that a lot of people didn't know about. I didn't know about it. Yeah. And she did it in a way that didn't sound preachy. It was just, hey, here's a thing that a lot of people don't know about. You should go do it. And so I felt like there was a little of that. I mean, not that her performance wasn't deserving. Right. But I feel like if you're looking and it kind of tips the scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were, like, the 4 performances I saw were all strong. I liked them, but I have no objection to her winning. I like Frances McDormand generally, so you know, and all of the things you said too, like, she, you know, her great speech she gave at the ceremony, and you know, like, certainly of the many complicated characters in Three Billboards, I think she is at least sort of, at least sort of superficially, she's kind of the one acting as the force of change that produces some. Right. Well, I don't know. I guess it's hard to really call the events of that plot positive developments, really. But she is the one that's fighting against the status quo, which everyone can agree was not good.
Right. I think the last thing to say about this category before we move on, at least for me, is that it was nice that 4 out of the 5 were also Best Picture nominees. That it wasn't like, you know, oh, let's acknowledge some odd movie that just gave a woman the ability to, you know, be a historical figure or something. Like, these were the best movies with women leads, like that. I think that is important, you know. And I agree. It wasn't a Best Picture, but like, Margot Robbie is clearly the lead. I mean, that's a
well, and I Tonya got a lot of really good buzz. Some people thought it might get a Best Picture nomination. That's one of the ones that I kind of still want to see, but I haven't made it yet. But
it doesn't feel like some niche movie, like, you know, the.
Well, that's been a thing that we've talked about in previous years, of this idea that the Best Actress category is often composed of these little movies that you are less likely to have gone to see, because only the little independent movies ever give women good enough roles to get nomination for.
Right. And while it's not the mainstream media or mainstream audience's choice, but even just our choice, of if we're gonna make decisions on what movies to see, like we're picking the highest ROI.
Mm.
And a lot of the best actress films don't have an ROI on like how many nominations they have, because a lot of them only had that nomination. So it's nice to see that, again, 4 out of the 5 also had like the best picture plus, and then I, Tonya, like clearly had more than just this, and was a possible best picture. I mean, I think that right there is really impressive and also makes me really happy, because these were all great performances, but that, you know, starts to give a little bit more equal representation.
So let's talk about Best Supporting Actor. We touched on it a little bit earlier, just in the sense that I kind of would have liked to see Richard Jenkins win, just from a sentimental standpoint. But certainly Sam Rockwell is very good. Woody Harrelson also very good in his role. I mean, it's like that's one of the real strengths of that movie, is just that it's got some compelling, complicated characters in it that are just really meaty for good actors to perform.
Yeah, and I think that, again, what we talked about when I was talking about with the best picture is that, like, the whole point of this movie was using these compelling stories to tell this complicated, theme, and it only works because they achieved it. So we might as well recognize them, and so Frances McDormand, yes, won. I mean, I would have been equally as happy as with Woody Harrelson winning this, but I thought Sam Rockwell had obviously more in the film. Woody Harrelson was just more of like, he was your initial target, and then, he.
Yeah. Well, yeah. One of the interesting nuances of the Woody Harrelson character is how much of his complexity really is more indirect. Like, the things to not like about Sam Rockwell's character are right there on the face of his character. Like, he does awful, terrible things. But mostly Woody Harrelson's character likes to think of himself as a good guy. And he's the good guy who wants to give people a second chance. Even the cop who tortured a black prisoner in their police station and is still on the job. Because it's just not fair to ruin a whole guy's whole career just because of a little slip up like that. He's got a good heart, and I think I can coach him into a better person. And at a certain point, you kind of want to say, dude, no. It was one of the things.
There's a part of it, like, where you feel like you feel like that's a thing you've said about somebody. At least if you're, I mean, I felt that way of people I've been a leader of who have not been great, obviously not this bad.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the weird, like, kind of extrapolation of it is that, yeah, I've had people who worked for me who haven't done a great job. And I've said the same thing, like, well, no, if a little bit of coaching and some help, I can get them there. And this is just sort of this bizarre extrapolation that is kind of interesting to watch.
Right. Well, yeah. So just this, one of the things, though, that I like, one of the most satisfying moments in the movie, I thought was, again, because we're not worrying about spoilers here, is that, after Woody Harrelson's character kills himself, and the new chief comes in and just immediately fires Sam Rockwell's character. Now, on top of anything he had done previously, this new police chief had also just watched him walk across the street and throw a guy out the window. So the fact that he's not in jail is already kind of like,
yes.
It's like he's already kind of, why is he like, but at least it's sort of like an immediate, no, you're fired. And like, I loved how Sam Rockwell's character kind of turns to one of his sort of pseudo allies there in the force, just kind of going like, so is that like a fired thing or like a suspension thing? And the guy's just like, fired. So, but just like that moment of, like, look, finally there's a guy who's going to actually do things instead of saying, well, I don't know, I'm not sure that's the way we do things around here, that sort of thing. And see, that's kind of the complexity of Woody Harrelson's character, is that he acts like he's just this good old boy who, you know, wouldn't hurt a fly, and he just wants to do the right thing. But so often the right thing includes giving a second chance to people who've really hurt people, and not working that hard to change their behavior, and leaving them in positions of authority, and just saying, well, I don't know what I can do. I wanted to catch your daughter's killer, but I don't know how. And I mean, I'm being a little bit, you know, over dramatic here now, but it's a perfect example of the difference between his character and sort of the things that that are wrong or bad about the way he acted, compared to the more obvious and superficial ways, not superficial, but the more obvious and apparent ways that Sam Rockwell's character acts. You know, where it's like he's just overtly racist and violent, and you know, it's one thing to say, okay, well, obviously his mom screwed him up. He had a rough start. Like, what, you know, it's hard to imagine in what line of work he could have been a success, but that also doesn't mean you just leave him in that position.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think that's why I'm good with him winning this performance. It's not because of the redemption part of it.
Yeah.
It's the displaying of the complicated, like, anger.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I don't feel like he got, like as you said, the criticism, he didn't get redeemed at the end. And like, it's not
Mm-hmm.
about that. Like, it's about just showing like that there's, like, he's not the fairy tale monster that Michael Shannon is.
Right.
He became a monster because of things that happened to him, and we sort of learned that through his experience. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
he really handled that well. So you saw how he got to the end result.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I really liked about his performance. I mean, like I said, I liked Richard Jenkins awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Woody Harrelson was really good, but the fact that, like, he gave this, yes, he was a bad guy, but he wasn't just this, oh, I was born a monster, I'm acting like a monster, you know? And so, again, when you contrast him to Michael Shannon's character, like, there's more depth to him.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make him redeemed.
Yeah. So it was a very good performance of a complicated guy who is really awful in a number of important ways. But part of what the movie's choice is, and we already kind of talked through this, is just this recognition that in the world, there are usually complicated reasons why someone would act that way.
Correct.
And maybe that there is something in him that could be nurtured and make him better, but it's still a valid question to say whether or not he should be allowed to carry a gun and a badge while he works on that. That's not fair to other people. Anyway, though, so let's move on to Best Supporting Actress, and this is not to make a thing of it, but one of the examples of a movie that you saw and I didn't, which is Mudbound was in this category. So tell us a little bit about Mudbound.
So one of the most frustrating things about Mudbound is that it never grabbed my attention. So I even was like conflicted about putting Scene on here, because I started Mudbound and I finished Mudbound. But in and out of like watching what was happening, I read other things. Like, I
didn't hold your attention.
It never held my attention. And I felt really bad about that. And I felt like there was something wrong with me. But then ultimately I was like, well, no, Coco. I sat on my couch and watched Coco and didn't touch my phone.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. It is kind of the movie's job to keep you paying attention.
I mean, I watched Get Out because I had this weird 2-hour break at work once where I had something that started 2 hours later when I was done doing other stuff. I watched Get Out on my laptop at work, and I never touched anything else. So yeah, I eventually kind of settled into that and okay, well, Mudbound just didn't grab me. So I mean, again, like I said, I was hesitant to even put scene, but technically I was present while Mudbound showed on my TV.
I think that counts, but it's also it's a fair criticism to say that if it didn't hold your interest, then it's the movie's job. I mean, it's one thing to say if you started it and never gave it a chance, but that doesn't sound like what it was. It sounded like it didn't hold your interest, and that's fair.
Yeah.
So in any event, Alice and Janney won for I, Tonya, which neither of us saw. The three performances that I did see in Phantom Thread, Lady Bird, and Shape of Water were all very good. I like Octavia Spencer an awful lot, and she's a fun character in Shape of Water. Obviously, as we talked about, the character is not super deep, but none of the characters are, though. That's not a criticism of her character. It's the tone of the movie. Is the characters are not super complicated,
right? And she fits with the tone, and I thought that was, perfectly relevant.
Yeah. Yep. And then Laurie Metcalf plays the title character's mother in Lady Bird. And she's very good. She is she's always been good. I like her in just about anything she's in, and she's very good at body language. I saw a tweet celebrating one particular moment, but I'll just kind of repeat it in a way that makes no sense for anyone who hasn't seen it. But there's this moment where the daughter is trying on dresses at the store, and the mom's kind of looking at them as she comes out, and is I think it's prom dresses or something like that, where she comes out in one, and the daughter kind of likes it, and the mom's like, I don't know, it's is this the best version of you that you can be? And then the daughter's basically just like, well, what if it is, Mom? What if this is the best version of me that I can be? And the mom just kind of does this well, maybe, which is not exactly the response that the daughter was hoping for. But it's one of those complicated questions of I don't know, what response do you want from something like that? But just the subtlety of this little sort of head turn of might be. But yeah, she's good in a good role there. And then Leslie Manville in Phantom Thread, she plays the sister of Daniel Day-Lewis's character, and one of the trio of weird, messed up characters in that movie. She's very good in it.
And Allison Janney's good all the time, so I'm sure she's phenomenal in this.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt that she's a lot of fun in that movie, or at very good. I don't know necessarily that she's a fun character, although often she plays fun characters.
I think she's going to be good in that one. So
yeah,
I'm
I want to see I, Tonya. I'm looking forward to that one. All right, best original screenplay. The screenplay categories are a little bit weird for me this year because in best original screenplay, I saw all 5, and in best adapted screenplay, I saw only 1.
And I think I was the same way. Yep.
You didn't see all 5 in best original.
Oh, sorry, no, I saw more though in.
Yeah. Yeah. But Jordan Peele won for Get Out, which is fantastic. I'm so happy that he won for that because it's a great screenplay, and especially if you're going to say, well, of all of the different categories that Get Out might win for, I think really this is probably the best one for him to win. If in the sense if you're going to say it, one of them, I think
exactly that's how I felt too. Is okay, well, this movie, it's a long shot for any Oscar, and it's awesome that it's in all these categories. But if you were going to handicap it to get one, this would be the one you would get. And so it's awesome that he got this.
Yeah.
And and he beat Guillermo del Toro. He beat Martin McDonagh, and I'm happy for that, and I'm sure The Big Sick is great.
It is. That's another one that I feel like I can comfortably recommend to just about anybody, because it's firmly within the romantic comedy sort of genre, but also kind of transcends it. But it works well enough within the language and existing sort of cinematic language of romantic comedies that it's very accessible, even as it tells a bit of a bigger story with it. It's very good. I like it a lot. And then Lady Bird we kind of talked about too a little bit, just in the sense that it's very much the archetypal, young girl coming of age sort of story. Like it is a stellar example of that genre without really breaking any boundaries.
Right.
And it doesn't have to. It's just
a little bit more modernized,
Yep. Yeah. It doesn't have to break boundaries. It's just telling a story that we like, that kind of story. But yeah, so let's keep moving though. Got several more categories to cover. Best adapted screenplay went to James Ivory for Call Me by Your Name, which I didn't see and you didn't see, so hard to say there.
All I have to say about that is I felt like there's enough people who were impacted by this movie that it's nice that it won something.
Yeah.
I mean,
I feel like I want to see it. I'm almost more so than its Best Picture nominee. The fact that it won Best Adapted Screenplay makes me more interested in seeing it than I was even before.
Well, and I've seen Timothée Chalamet just, as somebody who just is coming on the scene, and people are starting to talk about him as being something it's going to be bigger than this movie. So I'd like to see it just to see his performance in this movie. Yeah. I mean, it was nominated as well.
Yeah. So best foreign film is a sad trombone for both of us. We didn't see any of them, either of us. So womp, womp. Yeah. It went to A Fantastic Woman from Chile, and I know very little about it because I didn't see it. So sad.
I think it's about a transgender.
I believe that's correct. But I don't really know. I've just seen just 3-second clips from it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's all I know about it.
Sizzle reel stuff. So, but best original score. This is another category where I did manage to see all 5. Went to The Shape of Water, which I loved. I loved the music of that. I actually bought the soundtrack of that one.
Yeah, so I'm good with this one just because it felt like it contributed to that fairy tale atmosphere more than obviously Hans Zimmer in Dunkirk was great.
Yeah, well, and we talked about how the music really effectively built the tension in that movie.
Yes, but this really it was part of what made the atmosphere of the movie. So I'm totally good with that, even though I missed 2 of them, but
the only one of the 5, honestly, that sort of surprises me is 3 Billboards, just because I feel like it was not that long ago that I saw it, and I can't remember a single thing about the music. I can't even imagine in my head even just bits and pieces of it. I don't even remember what the music sounded like at all.
Me either.
Yeah. And then Star Wars, this is Star Wars, right?
Yeah, it's Star Wars, but it's Star Wars music, so it's not like he didn't reinvent Star Wars music.
Now, one thing we've talked about with scores too, though, is that there's music that calls attention to itself and music that's intended to fade into the background, right? There's different styles of score, right? And so maybe the issue is just the 3 Billboards one. We don't really remember it because it was by design intended to just fade into the background. Whereas for really all 4 of the rest of these, I would say that the music is intended to be noticed.
It's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that said, that's speculative because I can't remember anything about it. Okay, so best original song, and it went to "Remember Me" from Coco, but it was "This Is Me" from The Greatest Showman that you were saying you felt like you would have liked that one to win.
Yeah, I felt stronger about just that, the impact that that song had on the movie. And I mean, not, and it was a good, I thought it was a better song just to begin with, but
Mm.
I mean,
I liked it a lot in the presentation in the ceremony.
well, and I was going to say that too, when especially when you mentioned that "Remember Me" didn't necessarily blow you away in the ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, okay, so I like this song the best. I thought it had the most impact on the movie, and it had the best in ceremony presentation, and it didn't win. I kind of felt a little let down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the in ceremony presentation is hard to use that as a criteria for anything because all the votes would have been in already. So
Yes,
it's like,
but I,
but
well,
yeah, it could contribute to your emotional response to it winning,
right.
or not
I
winning
think I was
rather.
more thinking of like the devotion they would give to the performance if they thought like they had legitimately won versus
Mhm.
like, I guess, yeah, but
Yeah. But yeah, so I honestly, I definitely noticed This Is Me. And I noticed Remember Me from having loved it already and thinking that the presentation of it on the stage was not what I loved about it. The others, honestly, just like I know I watched it, but it did not make particularly an impact. However, honestly, it's often the case in these where if you haven't seen the movie, then it's easy for the song to just
right. And
dip.
I think the only one you even saw was "Remember Me."
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct. But so let's move on to best production design. This has a couple of new movies that we hadn't really talked about yet in our discussions.
I have to let my dog. He's waiting to
Okay.
go.
All right. So the winner was Shape of Water, which I agree with. I managed to see all 5 of the nominees in this case, and The Shape of Water was definitely my favorite in terms of the production design. There's always a million interesting things in every corner of the screen in Guillermo del Toro's movies, um, and it just contributes so much to this sense of place, both firmly establishing it in sort of a pseudo 1950s setting, but also heightening everything in a way that gives it that fairy tale quality, and it's just expertly done from start to finish. But the two that we have each seen but have not yet discussed in this context are the live action Beauty and the Beast and Blade Runner 2049. So I'm hoping you can still hear me
Yeah.
as I say yes. Okay, good. So Beauty and the Beast, I know before I had seen it, I had mentioned briefly my reluctance because I have a bit of a knee-jerk response to automatically dislike live action remakes of traditionally animated movies. And having watched the new live action Beauty and the Beast, I deem it fine, but I also still, throughout, in every single scene, wished I was watching the animated one instead.
Wow. That's a strong reaction.
It's like, it's fine. I didn't hate it. It's a good story and it's well told. The production design is good, but I like all of those things in the animated one better. And it just basically, every moment that it was good reminded me of the animated one. Like, to the extent that this one was good, it was good because it reminded me of the other version that I like better. And it's not that there's anything wrong with this one, except that it exists, which is, I know, kind of an irrational position to take, but that's where I'm coming down on it.
And there's going to be more and more coming.
Yeah. It's obvious that that's true because there's apparently a big segment of the movie-going public that disagrees with me on this, and that's fine. I'm glad they like them, but I'm not going to make an effort to see them generally.
So I fall into probably a slightly different category from how you defined everybody, and that I didn't need this, but I'm good with it. It was fun. I liked it. I enjoyed myself. I liked that it used modern technology to take something I liked when I was younger and like flesh it out in a different way. Like I thought it was fun.
Huh? I don't want to tell anybody else that they shouldn't like it. Yeah. And it's not even that I disliked it. It's more just a matter of it's there's a phrase that I feel like I've been hearing all over the place now. It's one of those things where, you know, you hear something and then you start noticing it everywhere. The idea is a hat on a hat. It's like you've got a hat and now you've just embellished it with an unnecessary addition. And it's like, it's not that this version is bad in any way. It is skillfully made. And obviously a lot of really talented people worked very hard on making it as good as they can make it. And I think that if not for the existence of the other one, I would probably like it more. But it is not allowed to stand on its own because it is explicitly a remake.
Yeah, and I guess I'm more on the, you know, I had a hat that I got in the 90s. It was cool. Mm-hmm. Now I have a nicer hat that is similar. But I don't. So I'm not.
See, where I would disagree is that it's nicer.
I thought it. I don't know. I liked it.
It's fine. I don't want to tell anyone not to like it. My stylistic preference is for the animated one.
Right.
And because I prefer, yeah. So I didn't hate it. It's fine. It's fine. I just like the animated one better. And as a result, it's hard to watch this one being so similar to the animated one and yet different in ways that make me like it less. So that's kind of where it's hard for me to watch because it just keeps making me think of how I wish it was the other one.
And I felt nostalgic. So, I mean, yeah, I don't want to argue with how you feel, like, yeah. And just like you're not arguing with how I felt. I liked it.
I'm glad that you and so many people liked it, and I mean that sincerely. I'm not trying to be like dismissive or condescending about it, but it's not for me. It's doing something with the story that moves it further away from what I liked about it originally.
Yes. Well, and the reason why I'm kind of digging in is because I went through this sort of, what do you want to call it, like an existential like debate or crisis. I have concerns that the movie industry is moving into only remakes and or sequels. Like there's a general like feeling of mine that we're running out of new ideas and we're just regurgitating things. And so, yeah, when something like this comes out, I have a natural hesitation towards it. And when I really enjoy it, again, it's the same thing. Like I think that, people who are listening are seeing there's something with me is sort of the defiance of expectations. It's, why I like this movie. It's why I loved Coco. It's why I really like Blade Runner. I didn't have a ton of expectations for that, and it blew mine away. And then on even a smaller scale, it's like why I find amusing movies like Baywatch, because there's such a low bar, and if they kind of achieve that, then I'm good.
Yeah. Well, sure. I think there's plenty of room for movies that strive to just be just pure entertainment.
Right. And so with this one, I think my expectation was more, and I think so the end result was different. That you and I went into it with the expectation of, we both love the original, and we're hesitant about this idea that Disney's going to do this. It's not only this movie, but multiple other movies. And I left the movie okay with what they did with it. So it's a funny thing to say that like I was okay with the movie and that makes me defend it. But when I was going into it with what your attitude of like this was unnecessary, and then I was okay, like the distance between the expectation made me like now that makes me want to defend it to you.
Well, and I mean, I don't want to overstate. Like I've been using hyperbole a little bit because I have kind of a philosophical stake in the ground that I'm setting. That's a weird metaphor. But at the same time, it's like I'm not angry about the movie or anything. It's more just a matter of allocation of resources. You know what I mean? It's like they've obviously got a lot of really talented people who worked really hard on this. And I kind of feel like I would have rather they told a different news story instead of retelling one that existed already. And I know that that's a different sort of thing because it exists because of the other one, not just like to remake, but like they wouldn't make it if it wasn't a remake.
Right. They're thinking of it as like homages.
Yeah.
Not recreations. And when I sort of leveled myself to that made me feel good. But I'm not saying you need to feel good about that. That just made me feel good. I was like, oh yeah.
And it's not that I feel bad so much as I just feel kind of, it's, you know, it feels like a little bit like watching someone spend an awful lot of money on something you think's a waste. It's just kind of like, well, okay. I mean, they're allowed to spend their money and obviously a lot of people like it. So I don't begrudge them making movies for them, but it can also recognize that it's not for me. They are making a decision with this movie to move it further away. See, I have a great nostalgia and affection, not just for individual movies, but also just for 2D animation generally. I love the look of it, the style. I think there's things that you can do with it that don't work the same in live action. And that for the remake to it's like, you know, it's live actionified, high def it and make everything see like how intricate all the little sets are and all the little curlicues and everything, like making like there's detail in every, you know, every frame. Like I praised Shape of Water for doing that. I think it does it better than this one, than Beauty and the Beast. But like there's something to be said for the clarity of the lines in 2D animation. And what makes me sad, just as a general, more abstract subject, is that just the nature of technology and the money-making business of Hollywood, which is just a fact, it's not worth getting mad about. Just 2D animation, by and large, is not economically viable in the same way that live action and CGI movies are, even very expensive ones. Because whereas I really love the medium of the 2D animation, they don't make as much money and they're very expensive to make and they take a very long time. And that's a fact. And I can recognize that the movie industry is moving away from a thing that I love because it costs too much and it doesn't make its money back. And I can be at peace with that and still sad about it. And so this, as just like a pinnacle example of that, stings a little bit. But I'm not mad. It's fine. It's well made. It's just not what I wanted them to make. So, how about Blade Runner?
Yeah, you've drawn your line in the sand. We are. Yeah.
I'm not demanding that anyone come over to my side, but I'm also staying here.
Right. And I would say I'm towing the line, but no, I don't care that much. I enjoyed it. I'm excited for the new ones. I can't wait for Aladdin. I can't wait.
I hope they're great. Maybe one of them eventually will change my mind, but I doubt it, not because I think that they won't be good, but just because it seems like the trend is away from what would make me like it better.
Fair enough. Blade Runner.
Blade Runner 2049.
So here's a remake.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sequel.
It's a sequel. Unconventional sequel.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's in the same.
Yes. Its intention is, while it is technically a sequel, it is intended to be a modernized remake. Like, can we read that? Like,
I'm not sure I do. What I will agree to, and I think this is maybe what you're kind of getting at, is that this story is intended to be a reflection of the previous one, in the sense that we've got a detective doing sort of a noir investigation type of storyline in this setting, which is similar to what was done then in the original. And so the story is intended to reflect that one, but it not only does continue, but it also takes the story ultimately in a different direction. And so that's why I wouldn't call it a remake personally, but it becomes just semantics at that point.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I loved it. And this was also another one which, like with a lot of these things, so I have my wife is sort of a less discerning film critic as we are. I mean, she's more for the big blockbusters and all that type of stuff. So when I'm always extra excited when I convince her to watch something that's going to have a little bit more depth to it, like Coco. I mean, Coco is on itself can be a blockbuster, but we had it like that. And this same thing with Blade Runner. Like, to see somebody who's not used to that subtle sci-fi, like, genre twisting that the original Blade Runner gave us, of the noir and the sci-fi and the ambiguity of the characters and, like, the sort of complex motivations, like that. She's watched the original Blade Runner only because I told her that she needed to watch it before we could watch this. And because this one had Ryan Gosling in it, I knew I could convince her to watch this. But, you use the motivations you can.
Sure.
But she watched it and she also felt the same. She felt like how I felt after the original Blade Runner, which I know this one isn't as complex as that, but it says something for, like, people who aren't used to that kind of movie.
Yeah.
And that's really good. And it was, and just for me watching, it was a beautiful movie. I think you and I have talked about this in regards to Ready Player One. But what we're worried about is with some of these sci-fi movies is, like, that new AI, where you're, like, trying so hard to be, like, telling this big story and using all these tools that you kind of neglect the part that makes the movie fun. I mean, I think, isn't that what you?
I'm not. I feel like I've said other things about Ready Player One. I'm not sure I've made that point about that movie in particular.
Oh,
I mean,
I thought you and I had the conversation where maybe it was somebody else, where compared it to, like, I'm worried because of sometimes Spielberg's, like, efforts to put, like, so much meaning behind it, you end up with the movie AI.
If we've had that conversation, it was a while ago. I don't because where I'm at more with Ready Player One. With Ready Player One, I'm actually optimistic about Spielberg's contributions, because I think, although I loved the book on first reading, in hindsight, it's very much a one-trick pony with its leaning on the nostalgia button just super hard. and coincidentally happening to be interested in nostalgia that fits with my own particular interests. You know, like there's a lot of overlap in terms of things that I'm nostalgic about. And so it works really well in that regard. But I feel like the book, in a lot of ways, kind of comes right up to some of deeper ideas and then doesn't really commit to them. But I think that it's possible Spielberg might be able to bring that out. And so
that's where I sort of appropriated this, was that the idea of it, you know, exploring ideas of nostalgia that were only relevant to us. And that I was worried that the Blade Runner 2049 would only be relevant to me because I was a Blade Runner fan. And so to see somebody who I had just only introduced to Blade Runner and who did like it, I mean, she liked it, but then for her to be fully involved in Blade Runner 2049 when I was as well meant that the story like was broader than that. And I was happy to see that. And like, I know it's hard to say, like when you see it through the lens of somebody else as well, but that was really exciting about the movie. And then of course, I mean, it had all the nostalgic parts of, you know, obviously Harrison Ford is in it, and it's very clear up front that we're talking about, you know, a skin job. Yeah. You know, and what is the reality of that relationship, you know? And
I really respected that it took some obvious predictions and expectations that audience might have brought to it and then really deliberately veered away. Like, for example, just the idea that given that one of the biggest, you know, controversies of the first movie is this, it's not even really controversy, mystery, like the idea of, is Deckard himself a replicant? Right? Like that's one of the big debates in the first one is, I feel like, you know, with all the various different cuts, it seems fairly definitive that he's supposed to be in the first one, but it's certainly not confirmed. And the movie here does something really interesting, which is to walk a razor's edge of continuing to not confirm it either way. I thought that was fascinating that it didn't just pick a side. Because it really kind of, the story works exactly the same regardless of what the answer is. It just manages to make that answer ultimately not important.
Right, because the idea is that somehow replicants, you know, procreated. And it doesn't matter if it was a replicant and a human, and which one, because, you know, again, it walks that razor's edge of like, well, is Deckard the replicant? Is Rachel the replicant? Are they both replicants? Are they, you know, it doesn't matter. What they just lay out and they say that somehow in his vision they procreated. Yeah. And then it also does the other thing that I think is all, you know, again, for me is always phenomenally interesting is when they walk you down this line of where you think the story is going to go, and everybody's just assuming that Ryan Gosling is going to be the child. Right. But then there's this like whole twist of, no, he's not the child. Yeah. He was just implanted with the memories of the child. And like, that's like scary, like mind-blowing, like, right. Well, and it's this huge meta element to that too, because it's not like Coco where we have an expectation, like, and this is not a criticism of Coco, but it's just different. But it's not like that one where the way that the story is functioning is that we
having seen lots of movies before, can anticipate what the story might be going to do, and it leads us in that direction, but then veers away from it in a surprising, satisfying way. But what this one is doing is it's making that expectation explicit within the narrative and shared by the protagonist. He also believes that he is going to turn out to be this kid, and increasingly so as the story develops. And then it makes the story about realizing how he wanted it and then having to deal with it not being true. And what does that mean? Because he had started asking all of these big questions because he thought it might be him, that he was special in some way. And then realizing, oh, well, he's not, or at least not in the way that he thought he might be. And dealing with that within the narrative, and not it just being a surprise for us, the viewer, but also within the narrative, a surprise for the character.
Right, and that's where I love that there's a little more subtlety to that, in the fact, like the way that it ends, because it's kind of complicated. And so the girl who we now assume is the actual kid,
mm-hmm.
and the architect of these things, is she can see the real snow that's falling on him.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're like, well, did she architect that? Is there some other connection there that they have? Does she only see that because she gave him her memories? Or is he also, like, it leaves like still just this like shred of ambiguity of like, well, is that all that
Mm-hmm.
with him? Is that it? Because there seems to be something else that her and him are connected with. And maybe that's it, but maybe it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It just leaves you sort of kind of looking and being like, wow.
Well, it very much like the original movie.
It's original, yeah.
and like a lot of other, I don't know that you necessarily call this cyberpunk, but cyberpunk certainly overlaps some with Blade Runner and such, where like things like Ghost in the Shell, for example,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm not talking about the live action recent remake movie of that, which is kind of a whole other mess beyond the discussion we were having earlier about Beauty and the Beast. But a lot of where these movies live and die is exploring up to trying to probe the boundaries of these big existential questions, and then leaving us in a place where we don't know that we don't feel like we really have an answer, and we understand that there might not be a definitive answer, and you kind of have to come to peace with picking something in the middle and just trying to live with it.
Yeah.
I will say that while, like, for example, technically we started talking about this because we're in production design, and then it also got nominated and won for cinematography. Clearly very beautiful in that regard. The one there's two minor criticisms that I'll make about it that are not reasons not to see the movie or anything, but just things that maybe could have been better. One is just Jared Leto's character. I feel like I wasn't super invested in, and in particular the scene where he basically births this new replicant and then cuts her open just because she can't have kids, except that, like, wouldn't he have known that? So what was the whole point of that scene except to just show him being cruel and mean? And that kind of just like felt, I like, why did that happen? What is the story reason for him to have done that? It makes no sense.
Yeah. What it felt like to me was they were trying to create a like a combo Tyrell and shit, I can't remember the main replicant's name.
Batty.
No, the male
one.
Rucker Hauer.
Yeah, Roy Batty.
Roy. Oh yeah, Roy Batty. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what you said.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel
like create like a combo of like
mm-hmm.
Roy Batty's like intensity with like Tyrell's genius.
Yeah. And, well, I feel like I could get what they're going for. It just didn't quite work for me, and I don't know it's not Jared Leto's fault necessarily, and in particular, like that scene is certainly not his fault because it's not the performance. It's just that I'm watching events happen that make no logical sense within the narrative. And it seems like the only reason for this scene is to make us not like him even more by having him kill an apparently harmless, helpless, naked woman for no apparent reason other than he's just a dick. Like, so it didn't make sense in the story for him to do that. And that is, I think, part of what broke it for me. Like, why? He just made this replicant. He would know what it's able to do. And it seems like what he did was stab her to death in the gut with a dagger because he didn't make her able to have children. He was unable to make her able to have children. So therefore she needed to be stabbed to death in the stomach. And I just like it was just a very unpleasant scene. And I didn't understand the purpose of that other than, hey, like this is a classic trope. Let's have the bad guy kill someone so we know how bad he is. The other thing was, I think the final sort of fight sequence there on sort of the weird like beach, like that retaining wall beach was interesting in concept, but felt super slow paced to me. I feel like there was about 3 minutes of that sequence. I haven't rewatched it with a stopwatch or anything, but what felt like subjectively was about 3 minutes where we would cut to Harrison Ford handcuffed in the car while the water's going up. Cut to what's her name looking sad. Cut to Ryan Gosling fighting with the guy. I'm vaguely remembering the layout here, the moving pieces there. I may be misremembering pieces of it.
You're essentially making sense, but
let me just finish the thought.
I didn't pacing of the scene. So
okay, fair enough. But what it felt like to me is we had those three kind of pieces that we're keeping track of, and it felt like we would cut from one to the next. A to B to C to A to B to C. And it felt like we would go on for like 3 minutes where nothing actually was changing about the situation. Where it's like, yep, there's Harrison Ford. The water's still going up. Yep, there's these two guys. They're still fighting. Yep, there she is. She's still looking sad. And I felt in the moment there in the theater like, I was liking this fight, but something more needs to happen. Things need to keep progressing here, and I was getting impatient with it.
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe maybe on rewatch I wouldn't feel the same way, but that's how I felt when I saw it in the theater.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But otherwise, certainly for production design and cinematography, it's a gorgeous movie, and I like kind of. I don't remember if I fully said this earlier, but I like some of the brave choices, like, for example, setting it far enough in the future that it's not just, hey, look, there's that neon sign we remember. Hey, look, there's that building we remember. Hey, look, this is the same city as before. It's like, no, it's different. Things are changing. And panning over these huge, like, block after block after block of buildings that are presumably just abandoned or without power, or who knows what's going on down there. But just because there's these huge swaths
that have become like
just ghost town, dead.
Where they've essentially like made San Diego like northeast New Jersey, but like on an expansive scale. Where it becomes the garbage dump of the other cities. It was. there were some interesting parts to that
Yeah.
that obviously I don't necessarily agree are going to happen, but
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think Blade Runner, even whether the first one or this one, I mean, are not necessarily, I think, intended to be we predict that this will be exactly what it's like. It's almost more like it's a cautionary tale sort of thing.
Yeah, like
yeah.
Escape from New York wasn't trying to say that's exactly what New York was going to look like.
Yeah, it's satire in that case.
Satire, and I feel like it's delivered well on that. So
yeah, very good. So yes, so Blade Runner didn't win for production design. Shape of Water did, but it did win for cinematography.
As it should have.
Yeah, it was very good. I'm excited that the director of that is now going to make Dune.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's very cool.
Now, I generally speaking wouldn't have said, yeah, let's make another Dune movie. But at the same time, if someone's going to make another Dune movie, he seems like maybe he's someone who could do something interesting with it. So best cinematography we talked about. Let's keep on rolling here. Best costume design went to Phantom Thread, which had a lot of fancy clothes in it. I don't know if we talked about this before, but costume design is one of those weird things for me where I feel like I'm about 40% more oblivious about anything clothing related than the average person, just because someone was telling me one of the interesting things about the costumes in Phantom Thread is that even though this guy is this famous dressmaker, his dresses are actually not that good. And I'm like, really? I don't know. It looks nice to me. I have. And so they were saying, no, but it's interesting, like that his dresses are just a little bit off. And I'm like, are they? Okay. So I don't know. I feel like I ended up seeing 4 out of the 5 nominees, but I just I don't feel like I know how to judge costume design. It had fancy clothes in it. I mean, at least in Phantom Thread, it's like explicitly part of this story, like where like the clothing is intricately involved in the plot. It's like
you want to yell Beauty and the Beast some more?
No,
you got that.
The costumes were fine. They were fine.
All right, so best makeup. We go back.
Best makeup. Darkest Hour
the point of the movie was, hey, we made Gary Oldman look like Winston Churchill.
Yep, they sure did that.
And they were rewarded for that.
Yep. I didn't know anything about Wonder, but in the clip from the award ceremony, apparently the makeup involved putting like some sort of a weird scar thing on a kid. So I guess points for that. Just in the sense that probably a kid dealing with makeup stuff is hard during production, I would think. Because, they're already limited in terms of how many hours a day they can work and stuff, and however many hours they have to be sitting in the makeup chair is going to cut into their production day quite a bit, I would think.
Yeah. But
yeah. All right, so let's keep moving. Best documentary feature. We each only saw one of them, but we each at least saw the same one, and coincidentally turned out to be the winning one. So that worked out.
Yeah, I mean, I liked this movie.
Yeah.
And I think I asked you when you first described it to me, like, well, who's Icarus in this? And I felt a little bit more confident in who that was after having seen it, because obviously, like, it is the director. It's sort of an ego thing to it. Even though there's like this whole other like segment to the doping that involves like this Russian like allegations and all that stuff. But the idea was that he started this movie with that, I'm just gonna try this out, and he ends up in this whole like other part of the world where there's this, doping scheme. So even if it's not like he physically, like obviously he physically is doping, but it's not like, I don't feel like that's the Icarus part of it. It's like that he just entered into this world.
See, I thought of the Doctor as Icarus in the sense that he was at the head of this huge program and flew too close to the sun and his wings melted and he had to literally go into protective witness protection.
I mean, I wouldn't. Yeah, that's not an.
I mean, but the idea that it could have many reflections within the movie, I think, perfectly reasonable. I mean, I think that might be why it's called that, because you could interpret it a couple of different ways.
I thought it was the cyclist who decided to start doping. So I'm going to start trying this. Just see if I can make the point of like how this impacts me. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I didn't just try this. Like now, I'm just wrapped up in all of this, and all I wanted to do was prove a point that doping is successful.
Yeah.
And here I am in this whole entire scandal. Like here I am, too close to the sun. So
do you think that he didn't like that though?
I think he felt complicated about it, which is why the Icarus, moniker makes sense.
Well, but like the end of the Icarus story is that his wings melt and he dies.
I don't know that everybody looks at it that way. I mean, I know it's accurate.
I mean, to my mind, when you invoke Icarus, what that explicitly is intending to convey is that someone's reach exceeded their grasp and they failed tragically in some way. Like they tried to do something amazing and weren't quite able to make it and fell as a result.
I mean, technically that didn't happen with the cyclist because he...
Right. Well, I would agree.
In his initial, shot at this doping, he didn't improve his skills, to the point that he thought was relevant.
Yeah.
But yet, then he kept going into this, and he sort of started to get wrapped up in this. So yeah, I don't know.
But see, that's why I was thinking, to my mind, that's where this Russian doctor kind of it fits that myth more, at least the way I was thinking about it, just in the sense that he was kind of trying to do everything, and it got too hot, and he ended up having to go on the run for his life.
Yeah, I think
lost everything. He had to leave his wife behind, his home.
Yeah, you might. I think you're convincing me.
All right. Well, I mean, but the idea that there can be more than one reflection of it, I think that's intentional.
Well, I mean, I think that's why. But that's why it's the best documentary, is because there's a lot of complexity. Like you open this movie with an incredibly different feeling with how you end this movie.
Yeah, it's kind of an astounding journey. Yeah.
You walk in, you're like, oh, this is about
this is like Super Size Me, only with bicycle doping. Except then it's like, oh, by sheer coincidence, this guy that I was going to have help me, turns out he is the guy in this huge international scandal.
Right, and there's all this doping, and there's all this stuff. Yeah. So
it was really interesting. I liked it.
Yeah, I liked it as well. I recommend it. It's the only one I've seen. So.
Yeah. All right. So, best sound mixing and best sound editing both went to Dunkirk. The movie that we haven't talked about yet that's in there is Baby Driver, which is I love it so much, and it's unfortunate that it's a little bit tainted now by Kevin Spacey's presence. But it's so good. I like it a lot. I would have liked it to win, but I think that wasn't going to happen pretty much for that reason.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
I got nothing to add. I mean, it was the fun part about going to that movie, but you're right. It just, it's tainted. It wasn't going to win. And you know what? Sure. Dunkirk, that stuff was awesome.
Yeah, it was certainly, I mean, the sound in Dunkirk was amazing. So it's not so much that I think Baby Driver would have won so much as it for sure wasn't gonna, because of this unfortunate external baggage. I think there are people who would have voted for it who didn't for that reason. But, you know, who knows? Dunkirk might have won anyway. It was certainly had very good sound in it. But you know, Baby Driver, I love it as a movie, and the sound was such an integral part of that. Like so many of these sequences where like not only is the music accompanying the action in like a metaphorical and emotional way, but like literally staging action sequences like musical dance numbers, not with real dancing, but just literally having beat for beat in the action sequence match the music in a way, but using like doing that with like pop songs. It was really good.
Yes.
And then it was fun. Jamie Foxx did a really good job at making me just absolutely hate his character. You know, for an actor that we usually like in things, and then in that movie, boy, you hate that guy. You hate him so much in that movie.
So bad. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and then John Hamm's terrifying too. By the end there, and then you know, and again, it's like the characters aren't too complicated in that. It's a little bit like Shape of Water in that sense, is that none of the character, like I read someone complaining that the like the love interest character is not, you know, that deep, and I'm like, who in this movie is? Like none of them are really especially deep.
Yeah, it's not about that.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing as like for Shape of Water. I mean, it's not really trying to tell a story about deep nuanced characters. But I liked it. I feel like there's a joy of filmmaking in that movie, and it's just a lot of fun, and I really loved it. And it's such a shame that you can't rewatch it now without having an unpleasant association there.
Yeah.
Anyway, you know, I mean,
although not ours, you know, like
yeah, I haven't tried rewatching it. Maybe I can, you know, it's like, but that was just, you know, Kevin Spacey is one of those ones where it's like, obviously it sucks for anyone to have, you know, awful behavior in their past, but I like him in so many movies. It sucks that it's like I feel like I don't like him now, and he ruined several performances that I really enjoyed otherwise.
Yeah, it was a convoluted part of life.
Yeah, I suppose.
Sometimes feel are shitty. You know, like this. Yeah.
Well, and you know, it's also true that like at a certain point, you know, I think it's fair to say, even if we don't want to continue to support him, that doesn't necessarily mean we have to retroactively dislike something that we liked before. But at the same time, you can't always make that choice, you know, from a rational place. Anyway, Dunkirk had good sound, and it won both of the sound thingies.
Yes, it did.
Best visual effects went to Blade Runner 2049, which had very good visual effects. Although I feel like it was actually a pretty strong year. I didn't see the new Planet of the Apes one. And it is not, I think, to that series' credit that I actually don't know if that's the third or the fourth movie in that series.
It's the third or the last. Third or the fourth. It's the last.
The most recent one.
It's the most recent.
We'll see if it's the last. But yeah, like I feel like I can imagine it being good, but it or at least the visual effects being good. Like, you know, I saw the first two. Whether that means this one is the only one I haven't seen, or whether there's another one that I'm not remembering. I don't know.
I think it's the third.
Yeah. It might be, but like, I don't know. It just, at a certain point, I felt like when I watched the trailer for this one, I was just sort of feeling like I don't know how much I'm supposed to recognize of what's going on. It seems like not very much, but it might just be because I'm missing stuff. I'm missing pieces. Anyway, Kong Skull Island is surprisingly fun. I think a lot of people overlooked that one, and I would say that they should not, because it's very fun. I like it. And then I loved Guardians of the Galaxy 2, although I would hope that by making the daddy issues explicit and taking all the subtext and making it, big capital bold letters text. Maybe we can be done with the daddy issues for a little while in these movies. Because it's one of these things where just like a lot of the superhero movies deal with, like father issues as, some of the dramatic meat. And that's a common trope in that kind of story. And this one really just goes all in for that. So I think it did it well, but they can tell some other kind of story now. Like Black Panther, for example, is a good one where it has a little bit of father issue stuff in it, but it's also taking that as just a piece of, it's a piece of context building a bigger idea.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a way different like father issue is, you have on one hand, one of the characters, the father issue is everyone thought my father was this great king.
Mm-hmm.
But I found out he did something I don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
How do I reconcile that? Like that's a complicated, good, like it's not my daddy abandoned me.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is my father took a stand against your father because he did not believe in what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Your father showed up, killed my father, and left me alone.
Yeah.
And so it's not a daddy issue. It's your daddy killed my daddy and just left me alone when I thought my dad was the one that was all right. I thought he was the one that was doing the right thing.
Yeah. So for our main character, our protagonist, to be in this position where the bad guy says, "This is why I want revenge," the protagonist is going like, "Well, shit, yeah, I would too. I mean, damn." Like that really sucks. I'm so sorry that happened to you. I wish I could undo it.
Thanks,
but I also don't really think that means you should be king and you should do all those other things that you want. But I feel I can understand why you're so angry. That makes
they're not like daddy issues, like quote unquote, in like the way that like people think. I mean, they're very complex motivations that that do revolve around their fathers,
Yep. And then, Star Wars is Star Wars. I mean, it has great special effects. Sure.
Yes.
Right. It's like they are what you would expect. Then the last category is best film editing, which also went to Dunkirk. That's another one that I think maybe I could have seen go to Baby Driver because that's one of the things that it was just really did well. I mean, that's Edgar Wright's, one of his things is just really flashy stylistic editing, and it's, gains story impact from it.
Yeah, but I'm okay to walk away with like just people just giving the credit to Dunkirk for those very, very technical things.
Yeah.
Because it was good at all of those. It was, and so like walk away with those Oscars.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
and I think that where Dunkirk seemed to fall apart, I think a little bit for me, and I think we were more or less on the same page, was just that it ultimately felt kind of like a technical exercise. And so it's skillfully made for sure, but it also feels a little bit like that's the only reason they made it, is like as a technical challenge. Not because not because Christopher Nolan really felt strongly that this was a story that people needed to know. It was more like, hey, I could make a war movie about a piece of the war that hasn't been excessively covered already, and I could do this flashy thing with 3 timelines in it, and it'll be cool. Yeah. But to be sure, on a technical basis, things like sound and editing and so on, very, very good, to be sure. All right, so that's all the Oscars. That's all the categories. We skipped the short features, of course, as we've previously talked about. Final percentages were not as far apart as we have been in some years. I ended up at 67.3 and you at 48.6. And, not that the number itself is important.
I was so determined to be over 50%. And like literally I could have just watched one more film and I would have got there, but I didn't. And I'm honest with my percentage. So
well, it also, we don't have to necessarily treat this as like the finish line. If you see one of these movies, go ahead and fill it in.
Yeah, I will definitely see Guardians of the Galaxy, Kong Skull Island, Star Wars, War of the Planet of the Apes. Yeah, I can go through the list of what I'm going to see. But I'm going to see a lot of these.
Yeah, but it's late enough now that I think I need to go to bed. But I'm glad we were finally able to kind of get through these. There's a lot of good movies. We had some good discussions here, and once again, I would call our marathon successful.
I call it successful.
It's accomplishing what we set out to do, which is to see movies we might not have otherwise and talk about them because it's fun.
I agree.
All right. So with that done, thank you everybody for listening and or watching, and watch good movies. We'll talk about movies again sometime. Who knows when?
Yeah.
All right. Good night.
It is the Oscar movie marathon.
Yep.